Chapter 10, Polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has a pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. All twins come from a single seed. Both poles are in the same ground. In all, both poles are in the same ground. In all, there is no extreme. There is no end or beginning. You can't have a half-truth. It's the truth or not. The great fourth Egyptian doctrine, the doctrine of polarity, embodies the truth that all manifested things have two sides, two aspects, two poles, a pair of opposites, with manifold degrees between two extremes. The old paradoxes, which have perplexed the minds of mortals, are explained by an overstanding of this doctrine. Mortals have always recognized something akin to this doctrine, and has endeavored to express it by such sayings, maxims, and aphorisms as the following. Everything is and isn't at the same time. All truths are but half-truths. Every truth is half false. There are two sides to everything. There is a reverse side to every shield, yet none of this is true. The Egyptian teachings are to the effect that the difference between things seemingly diametrically opposed to each other is merely a matter of degree. It teaches that the pairs of opposites may be reconciled in nature, but different in degree, and that the universal reconciliation of opposites is effected by the recognition of this doctrine of polarity. The teachers claim that illustrations of this doctrine may be had on every hand, and from an examination into the real nature of anything. They begin by showing that spirit and matter are but two poles of the same thing, the intermediate planes being merely degrees of vibration. They show that the all and the many are the same, the difference being merely a matter of degree of mental manifestation. Thus, the law and the laws are the two opposite poles of the same thing. Likewise, doctrine and doctrines, infinite mind and finite minds. Then, passing on to the physical plane, they illustrate the doctrine by showing that hot and cold are identical in nature, the difference being merely a matter of degrees. The thermometer shows many degrees of temperature, the lowest pole being called cold and the highest hot. Between these two poles are many degrees of hot or cold. Call them either, and you are equally correct. The higher of the 2 degrees is always warmer, while the lower is always colder. There is no absolute standard. All is a matter of degree. There is no place on the thermometer where heat ceases and coldness begins. It is all a matter of higher or lower vibrations. The very terms high and low, which I am compelled to use, are but poles of the same thing. The terms are relative. So with east and west, travel around the world in an eastward direction, and you reach a point which is called west at your starting point, and you return from that westward point. Travel far enough north, and you will find yourself traveling south, or vice versa. Love and hate are poles of the same thing, with many degrees of emotions between them. The musical scale is the same starting with C. The musical scale is the same starting with C. You move upward until you reach another C, and so on. The differences between the two ends of the board being the same, with many degrees between the two extremes. The scale of color is the same, higher and lower vibrations being the only difference between high violet and low red. Large and small are relative, as well as noise and quiet. Hard and soft follow the rule. Likewise, sharp and dull, positive and negative are two poles of the same thing, with countless degrees between them. Good and bad are not absolute. We call one end of the scale good and the other bad, or one end good and the other evil, or God and the devil, jinn and the angels, according to the use of the terms. A thing is less good than the thing higher in scale. So you have your God is up in heaven and the devil is down in hell. Here's where the big white lie of trickery comes in. Think, hell is full of fire and fire is light. So light on white is evil and the devil. Also think, and if God is up in the sky beyond the stars, then he is in darkness, so black and dark is good. The trick has been played on you. It's all the reverse. The light is evil, the dark is good, but that less good thing, in turn, is more good than the thing next below it, and so on, the more or less being regulated by the position on the scale. Up is dark, down is light, hell's fire, and so on. And so it is on the mental plane. Love and hate are generally regarded as being things diametrically opposed to each other, entirely different, irreconcilable. But we apply the doctrine of polarity. We find that there is no such thing as absolute love or absolute hate, as distinguished from each other. The two are merely terms applied to the two poles of the same thing. Beginning at any point of the scale, we find more love or less hate as we ascend the scale, and more hate or less love as we descend. This being true no matter from what point, high or low, we may start. See the trick. Love is up, hate is down. Love is dark, hate is light. There are degrees of love and hate, and there is a middle point where like and dislike become so faint that it is difficult to distinguish between them. So light dislikes dark. Thus, your racism is born. Courage and fear come under the same rule. The pairs of opposites exist everywhere. Where you find one thing, you find its opposite. The two poles, integration will always happen. And it is this fact that enables the Egyptians to transmute one mental state into another along the lines of polarization. Things belonging to different classes cannot be transmuted into each other, but things of the same class may be changed. That is, may have their polarity changed. Thus, love never becomes east or west, or red or violet, but it may and often does turn into hate, where black began to hate itself and become a form of white, but never true white. Black devils, and likewise hate, may be transformed into love by changing its polarity. Courage may be transmuted into fear, and the reverse. Hard things may be rendered soft. Dull things become sharp. Hot things become cold, and so on. Transmutation always being between things of the same kind of different degrees. Take the case of a fearful mortal. By raising their mental vibrations along the line of fear-courage, they can be filled with the highest degree of courage and fearlessness. And likewise, the slothful mortal may change themselves into an active, energetic individual simply by polarizing along the lines of the desired quality. The student who is familiar with the process by which the various schools of mental science, etc., produce changes in the mental states of those following their teachings may not readily understand the doctrine underlying many of these changes. When, however, the doctrine of polarity is once grasped, and it is seen that the mental changes are occasioned by a change of polarity, a sliding along the same scale, the matter is more readily understood. The change is not in the nature of the transmutation of one thing into another thing entirely different, but is merely a change of degree in the same things, a vastly important difference. For instance, borrowing an analogy from the physical plane, it is impossible to change heat into sharpness, loudness, highness, etc. But heat may be readily transmuted into cold simply by lowering the vibrations. In the same way, hate and love are mutually transmutable. So are fear and courage. But fear cannot be transformed into love, nor can be transmuted into hate. The mental states belong to innumerable classes, each class of which has its opposite poles, along which transmutation is possible. The student will readily recognize that in the mental states, as well as the phenomena of the physical plane, the two poles may be classified as positive and negative, respectively. Thus, love is positive to hate, courage to fear, activity to non-activity, etc. And it will be noticed that even to those unfamiliar with the doctrine of vibration, the positive poles seem to be of a higher degree than the negative, and readily dominates it. So black dominates white in all things given the chance. The tendency of nature is in the direction of the dominant activity of the positive pole, blackness. In addition to the changing of the poles of one's own mental states by the operation of the art of polarization, the phenomena of mental influence in its manifold phases shows us that the doctrine may be extended so as to embrace the phenomena of the influence of one mind over another, of which so much has been written and taught of late years. When it is understood that mental induction is possible, that is, that mental states may be produced by induction from others, then we can readily see how a certain rate of vibration or polarization of a certain mental state may be communicated to another person and their polarity in that class of mental states thus changed. It is along this doctrine that the results of many of the mental treatments are obtained. For instance, a person is blue, melancholy, and full of fear. A mental scientist bringing his own mind up to the desired vibration by his trained will, and thus obtaining the desired polarization in his own case, then produces a similar mental state in the other by induction, the result being that the vibrations toward the positive end of the scale the vibrations toward the positive end of the scale instead toward the negative, and his fear and other negative emotions are transmuted to courage and similar positive mental states. A little study will show you that these mental changes are nearly all along the lines of polarization, the change being one of degree rather than of kind. Knowledge of the existence of this great Egyptian doctrine will enable the student to better understand their own mental states and those of other people. They will see that these states are all matters of degree, and seeing this, they will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will, to change their mental states instead of being their servant and slave. And by their knowledge, they will be able to raise or lower the vibration at will, to change their mental poles, and thus be a master of their mental states instead of being their servant and slave. And by their knowledge, they will be able to aid their fellows intelligently, and by the appropriate methods change the polarity when the same is desirable. We advise all students to familiarize themselves with the doctrine of polarity, for a correct understanding of the same will throw out the idea that light is good and dark is bad. We see now why the Egyptians wore white to funerals. Black as night means in the heart of God. Peace.